Happy anniversary to the city that I love, the City of Falcon Heights. 75 years, that is fantastic.
Happy birthday, Falcon Heights.
Hello, everyone in Falcon Heights who lives here, works here, plays here, comes to the State Fair. For any reason that you're here or have been here, congratulations on the 75th anniversary of this fantastic community.
I want to wish Falcon Heights a happy 75th anniversary. I'm glad I had something to do with getting us through this far, and I hope we'll be celebrating many more.
Hi, I'm Randy Gustafson, current mayor of the City of Falcon Heights. You know, age is just a number, and as Falcon Heights celebrates as a city our 75 years of existence, it remains a resilient, growing, great place to raise a family, have a business, and visit. And we're going to be hearing from mayors that have served before me.
I think the most challenging thing that happened during the time that I was here was dealing with the State Fair and the policing and the fire coverage for the State Fair was the responsibility of the city. And it was an expensive responsibility. I don't remember the cost any longer, but it was substantial. And we went to the State Fair and asked if they would help us to defray part of those costs rather than our small city residents having to pay the full fare for the expenses during the State Fair. The State Fair said no. They were not willing to do that. It was our responsibility.
I think all the councils I served on and every council that's ever served in Falcon Heights, our major challenge and all of our minor challenges stem from the problem of trying to support all of the regulatory, public service, and public safety functions of a city where well over 50% of our landmass is not on the tax rolls. That takes some doing, a little tricky doing. And if I were to come up with a specific example of what happened during my term, you know, our budget can't respond quickly to surprises. There's no staff to lay off, and we have what is beyond a doubt, I think, the leanest tax base in the metro area. And I believe it was in about 1991 that I was at work, and I got a call from our city administrator, Jan Wiesner at the time, she said that there was a bill going to the floor of the legislature that morning that was going to prohibit any city from using property tax from residential property gained inside a tax increment finance area to be applied to anything except retiring those tax increment finance bonds. And when you look at the structure of our tax increment areas back then, that basically meant we were going to be out of business. We might have survived, well, had we celebrated a 50th anniversary, I would have been surprised. I called another council member, Paul Cerny at the time, and he and Jan and I flew down to the Capitol, trying to concoct language that would somehow save Falcon Heights from this, and we weren't having much luck for language that could go into the bill. But we got our Senator John Marty at the time off the floor, and we talked with him. And the fun thing of small city government is all he could think of and all he could get through at the time was an amendment that said, except for Falcon Heights. And that's how the amendment went to the floor. And that's how the bill went to the floor. And I don't know whatever happened to that bill, if it was passed or not. I didn't care, I guess, as long as it said except for Falcon Heights. But it was just an example of how when you have this lean a budget and this lean a tax base, that a blip You can't lay off staff. Our staff is as lean as our budget was. You can't postpone big projects because the only big projects we had were of immediate consequence. And coming up with that kind of a response and having to go right down there, get off work and everything, was, I think, part of the excitement of being mayor. I was probably a bit of an adrenaline junkie at the time, so it helped me. But to show you how, one of the things I loved about city government, how short the slide is from hero to zero, because we walked away thinking, oh my God, we saved the city. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. If a forensic accountant wants to go back, they could find out we would be in serious trouble. But so we were walking away feeling like heroes. And on that same night, we had a council meeting that included a public hearing for finishing Hamlin Avenue. That included putting a non-motorized vehicle pathway in some people's, what they thought was their front yard, but is the boulevard. And it was a packed house, of course. And now that meeting was as respectful as our meetings often were, but there were a lot of people in the audience who weren't looking at us as Cape superheroes that night. And if we could have voted, they probably would have had a new mayor and council member that night. But as I said, it just shows how short the slide is from hero to zero in local government.
You know, one of the biggest challenges that we faced in Falcon Heights, as well as throughout the country, was after the attacks of 9/11. We had 2 identified terrorist attack targets in the city of Falcon Heights, the state fairgrounds and one of the buildings on the Falcon Heights campus of the University of Minnesota. After the attacks of 9/11, we were all really struggling with, okay, what do we do to prevent, if we can, or respond, if we must, to any future attacks anywhere, including in a relatively small city as Falcon Heights is. We had relied on mutual aid agreements for police and fire and emergency response in the event that we would have something major in our city. But if there was going to be a large attack in a broader part of the Twin Cities area, none of those agreements would have kicked in because they would need help all over. So we got organized and we created, which was eventually the largest number of citizens trained in community emergency response per capita of any city anywhere in the United States. We followed developed curriculum. We had people of all ages come for 24 hours of training in how to identify hazardous conditions, what to do, how to do cribbing under fallen structures, just first aid, all kinds of things that we thought we might unfortunately need at some time. Fortunately, we didn't, but wherever there is an emergency of any kind, whether it's at your work, at your neighborhood, in your home, the people that are most likely going to come to your aid first are your neighbors, family, fellow employees. So having so many well-trained citizens in our community just benefits everybody, even if we never experience any major catastrophe. So that was a challenge. We did a great job overcoming it, and we even created an opportunity for people of all ages to develop a plan for how each one of us could help do something to prevent or respond to any kind of an emergency. And that plan actually was taken to Washington, D.C., and we shared that plan with the new Director of Homeland Security.
One of the greatest challenges, certainly the greatest challenge, that our city, I think, has seen in 75 years was the death of Philando Castile on July 6, 2016. I'll just set the stage for you. Before that day, July 5th, 2016, our biggest challenge was the most controversial thing in our city was building a sidewalk to our elementary school. That was a big issue for parents with young kids. It was a big issue for folks that lived along the route, but it did not make the front page of the Star Tribune. It didn't even make our local paper. Fast forward just a day or two, and a St. Anthony police officer shot and killed Philando Castile, and Falcon Heights was all across the state, the nation, even the world. That death reverberated across the globe. We knew right away that our city needed extra help, and we very shortly thereafter enlisted the help of the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota, Hamline University. The state of Minnesota stepped in to help. And first and foremost, our residents stepped in to help. And we put together a task force of mainly of interested residents, who really dove into the issues of policing and inclusiveness for months and months and months. And really critically, they tapped into the expertise and the passions, the interests of our residents and those that live nearby for community conversations about what we want our policing to look like in our city, and how we can become a more inclusive community. And held a number of community engagement opportunities where this task force that I mentioned would run ideas past the community, and then eventually the task force made recommendations through this community input process to the city council, which were adopted and still being carried out. So that by far was the biggest challenge that I faced, and I think it would be tough to argue was not one of, if not the biggest challenge that the city has faced in its 75-year history.
The main accomplishments that occurred during those years were Flower City, the Falcon Woods second edition, and Kaufman Retirement Center for the university. What happened with Flower City was that a fire started in a dumpster behind the building, which occupied the whole strip between Snelling and Arona. It was a large warehouse-style building, and the flowers in Flower City were plastic, and they were flammable. And the fire very quickly spread from the dumpster into the building, and the building was a total loss in a matter of hours. The redevelopment of that corner, of course, was a big priority for the city council. And we used tax increment financing as a tool to encourage the development of that strip, which led to the Falcon Crossing Center that's there now. We were heavily involved with the Falcon Woods second edition project. Originally, we had hoped that that might be a multifamily building development. There was a lot of controversy about that proposal, and it eventually ended up being a single-family development that's there today. I think the third big accomplishment was the sewer line that ran the length of Larpenteur, pretty much, in order to facilitate the development of the Kaufman Retirement Center for the University of Minnesota. But the other big project that occurred during those years was the building of the current City Hall. The old City Hall was a second story on top of the firehouse. The city used to have its own fire department. And it was a pretty small and old and really unsuitable kind of space for public offices and meeting rooms. And so it was completed during the years that I was on the city council, 1981. Still today, a beautiful building.
I often thought of working at other levels of government, but what attracted me to local government, I told people, and especially in a city this size, was the fact that if your representative in Washington or in St. Paul makes a mistake, makes a decision, it might show up in your life sometime, and you might get a little upset about it. And as the current election is showing, in a few years, you'll forget what actually went on anyway. And it was made by somebody you send a check to once in a while, but you never really run into. But when your representative at City Hall makes a mistake, it's going to show up really soon, and every time you open your door. And it was that immediacy, and and it's made by a guy, by the way, or a woman, who you're going to see when you go to the store, when you go to the drugstore, when you go to the school function, while you're just walking down the street. And it was that immediacy and intimacy that really drew me to local politics. And I ran for the council in '84, and I got here, and I didn't really find that. I found that we operated quite a bit like any other city. As problems arose, it took a long time to resolve them, to even come up with potential solutions, and it was slow in this size city. And when I became mayor, I intentionally set about trying to change that. And one thing I had identified with the problem is all of our standing consultants came from big firms that were used to dealing with big cities. And when we went to them for answers, they came back to us with that typical government defensive posture of when we get sued, here's how you can protect yourself. Or they came back with a posture that justified whatever the city was doing without a great deal of public input. And so my first term was only 2 years because we were changing the mayor's years of service. And at the end of that 2 years, or shortly after, we had a new city administrator, a new legal firm, and a new engineering firm. And shortly after, a new police department, which pretty much covers the waterfront of local government. And what we did was go from big firms where our constituents were kind of a paperclip in some junior member's drawer, to dealing with the principles. I remember 2 times where we had drainage issues, one in an alley and another in a drain we had repaired, where the people contacted City Hall. And I went down there with the principal from our engineering firm, not his assistant, but the principal. And he talked to the residents, and he talked to the single resident for the drain. And right there, he started sketching out solutions for them. And another time, I was called to a meeting of people who thought they were going to lose their house over a plan we had for the southeast corner, even though it wasn't a real plan at that time. And I was able to get a hold of my lawyer our lawyer within an hour for things that were possible and not possible out of this plan. And I could go to the meeting of residents who were quite upset about what was going on, and I could deliver the information directly. And all of our council members adopted, I think, that same personality. We wanted to be a place where government wasn't about estrangement and conflict, but was about face-to-face cooperation. And I think we accomplished that. I mean, and certainly I didn't do that alone. As I said, we had terrific council members. We had an excellent City Hall staff. And I think we really did change the culture, where City Hall wasn't a place where you came to find out how many problems you were going to have and then sent away hoping you could solve them. But it was a place you could come to find out about potential hurdles in your plans, plus people who would work with you directly to show you how far you could go toward your plan and still be all right in zoning matters and everything. And I think that was, I think that culture is still here. And when I look back on it, that's, I would say, my proudest accomplishment. And I knew I was making progress in direct contact with citizens because my children were quite young when I was in office. And when I went to the store, went out for the walk, I'd always say, "Hey, kids, you want to go with me?" And they would. Yeah. But after a few years of being mayor, I'd ask them, and they'd say, "Are you going to be talking to anybody?" And I'd have to promise them I would know. I'd get home as quick as possible. So I took that as a mark of progress.
I think that one of the things that I am most proud of that happened during that time was that we were able to redevelop the southeast corner of Snelling and Larpenteur, which is really the gateway to our whole commercial area. It took 5 years to do it, but we were successful when everyone told us there's no way a city as small as you can possibly gather the resources necessary for a $35 million redevelopment. But we did it, and we did it because the plan was developed by the community. We had 21 community meetings with people who owned businesses or homes or rented in the city, and we all together put together the plan for what we wanted on the site of a aging and getting worse 1950s era shopping mall. It turned out to be a successfully developed redevelopment, created housing for 170 additional housing units for seniors and families, and also some additional commercial space. We couldn't have done it if we hadn't had the help, support, involvement, and participation from most of the people who live or work here. So I want to say thank you for that, and hope that the city has just the most fun 75th anniversary celebration of any place in the whole world.
One of the things that I'm most proud of how our city really stepped up is in the area of sustainability. We did so by making our city as sustainable in our own operations, by being as energy efficient as possible, and one of the first cities in the state, maybe even across the nation, to use renewable energy. So we have a pretty decent sized solar array on top of City Hall that's working now, and we made it easy for our residents to be as sustainable as possible. So we did things like coordinate a solar bulk purchasing program. We expanded bike lanes, we expanded pedestrian lanes and routes. We did things like build a community garden, locally grown food, and boy, that has been so popular. Popular for homeowners, but even more so popular for folks that live in apartments. And it was so popular that we had to expand it by 50%. Just the year after we built it, there was just great demand for locally grown food. So that's a reason why, something that I'm proud of, and a reason why the city as a whole is seen as a sustainability leader in our state and our nation.
I really appreciate the efforts made by those before us, and I look forward to our celebration of our 75th year and the future that lies ahead of us.